Hello, everybody. This session in Art Unlocked is coming to you from the Wellcome Collection in London. We are very grateful to Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies for making it possible. I'm Sophie Schneider. I'm in the exhibitions department at Wellcome Collection.
And I'm William Schupbach, and I'm in the collections and research department at Wellcome Collection.
We're going to talk to you today about Wellcome Collection and some of the paintings which it holds, which are among 5,000 pictures from Wellcome Collection that are on Art UK. In fact, it might be surprising, but the Wellcome Collection is actually the largest single venue contributor to Art UK, although the collection itself is not primarily an artistic one.
A few words about the collection. Wellcome Collection is named after a man called Wellcome, Henry S. Wellcome, who was born in Wisconsin in 1853. He came to London in 1880 as the junior partner in a small pharmaceutical company called Burroughs Wellcome & Co. The small company became a large company, and Henry S. Wellcome became the sole owner of it. Around 1900, he also started a second career as a collector of various kinds of antiquities. On his death in 1936, he bequeathed both his pharmaceutical company and his collection to a British registered charity, the Wellcome Trust. The charity still flourishes today with the support of Wellcome's endowment, now much diversified. The charity funds research to improve health and manages the collection for the public benefit. Hence, the collection is available to the public at a building constructed for it by Henry S. Wellcome in 1932, the building on Euston Road that you can see on your screen.
So our collection is really vast and it's still growing. Our online catalogue of the collection includes about 600,000 items, so mostly books, handwritten documents, prints, drawings, and paintings and films. The collection also includes thousands of work that haven't been catalogued yet. So not all the items actually belong to Henry S. Wellcome, since many of them have been added since his death, according to his wishes. So the collection has a really active acquisitions program. We collect contemporary materials, some of which include kind of zines and artist books, as we're trying to capture the experiences and understandings of health and humanity beyond the expert and the privilege. So we're seeking out materials from patients' voices, for example, which are so often missing from histories of medicine and health. We also have temporary and permanent exhibitions on display, which do include some material from our collections, as well as contemporary art commissions, artist loans, and other institutional loans. We have a permanent exhibition on which explores what it means to be human in the 21st century, called Being Human. But we also have some more temporary thematic exhibitions with the topics that include sight and vision, milk, magic, and much more. But so much of our collections are actually outside of our exhibitions. For this presentation, we've selected just a few of the 5,000 items that are on Art UK, and we've organised them around 4 kind of themes. So the first one is looking at some of the regions which the Wellcome Collection has been brought together, with examples from North America, Canada, India, and the Hispanic world. And then the second theme is kind of this understanding of nature, which is one of the favoured subjects in the collection. Thirdly, we'll be looking at our locality in North London. We're on Euston Road. I'm looking out right now. So it'd be great to explore that. And lastly, works by women artists. But we really could have chosen 50 different themes, but this is what we've decided to go through. So we're ready to talk about our first painting, which is Painting of Fort Simpson. It's the work of an Indigenous Canadian painter and carver of Tsimshian Nation, Frederick Alexi. who was around in 1853 to 1944, and he was a witness to his land rapidly changing and the kind of cultural erasure through European territorial encroachment, and then consequently in 1867 the creation of the Canadian Federation. Alexi's painting records the bay, Fort Simpson, later renamed to Port Simpson, but what is on the Laxquam land of the Band community in northwest British Columbia. Alexi depicts the fort at a time, 1902, where the fur trade, which was once a force that drove European colonization, was declining. So the Hudson Bay Company built Fort Simpson as a trading post on an ancient mouth of the Nass River, which you can see in the picture there, in the 1830s. Consequently, there was an influx of European Christian missionaries who came to work and who attempted and succeeded in parts to convert large parts of the local population. The fur trade was detrimental to the indigenous communities in British Columbia, as by 1882, 70% of indigenous communities across the area were killed in the last major smallpox epidemic. Alexi's father worked in the Fort Simpson site, but Alexi himself was trained as a carver, where he produced naxnox, which is spiritual kind of paraphernalia and wood-carved items for use in spiritual ceremonies. But he also produced artwork for the Curio-Indio trade, a trade which still exists today, where indigenous artwork and crafts are sent back to Europe. And this painting is an example of this. So Wellcome bought the painting from Alexi during a journey that he was making down the west coast of North America in April 1917, while campaigning for the rights of indigenous inhabitants. You can see here the painting is painted in house paint on embossed wallpaper, which is possibly salvaged from the Hudson's Bay ship, the Beaver, which you can see entering the harbour on the right there. And you can also see the fort, the plank houses with smoke kind of issuing through from the rooftops, and the poles, and a very populated waterfront. Canoes are also drawn in his typical style in motion, canoes being very much associated with the Tsimshian people.
Jumping from British Columbia to the other side of the globe, our second item is one of very many paintings, manuscripts and books in the Wellcome Collection from India. Many of these paintings were made for the market in India, bought by British travellers or professionals working there, and brought home to the UK and consigned after their deaths to auction, where they were bought in the auction rooms by Henry S. Wellcome in the 1920s and 1930s. But if you search Art UK using just the word Indian, you'll see the range of subjects, dates and styles of the Wellcome paintings. The painter who produced the painting on the screen would perhaps be surprised to know that it ended up in a British collection, as it shows a heroic opponent of British rule in India, the Rani of Jhansi. She was Rani Lakshmibai, the widow of the Raja or ruler of Jhansi, a state created by the East India Company around the city of Jhansi, which is about 300 miles south of Delhi. After his death in 1853, the British government did not accept his adopted son as his successor. War broke out between Jhansi, led by the Rani, and the British Army in India, as shown in the painting. The idea of a woman leading troops into battle captured the imagination of artists both in India and in Europe. The Wellcome Collection includes 5 paintings of the Rani riding into battle on horseback, 4 of which are shown on Art UK. Why does Wellcome Collection have 5 paintings of the Rani of Jhansi in battle? The answer lies in the collecting methodology that Wellcome adopted. Wellcome was one of many collectors who used the evolutionary collecting philosophy established by the archaeologists Augustus Henry Lane Fox Pitt Rivers in England and Sir William Wilde in Ireland, and many others in the mid-19th century, according to which the collector assembles large numbers of small, relatively cheap and similar items, rather than, as in most royal and princely collections, a relatively small number of very precious, sophisticated, rare and expensive items. The resulting network of connections in the Pitt Rivers type of collection reveals as much about past cultures and their developments as the few untypical treasures of the princely collectors, at least in theory. Like Boudica, the Rani of Jhansi was the subject of many pictures, and the paintings of her in the Wellcome Collection reflect her position in visual culture, in Indian history, in women's history, and in contexts that we do not know because they have not yet come into being.
Great. So for the last picture in this first theme, I want to talk about the Virgin of Guadalupe. So sacred subjects of different religions play a big part into the collection, as William has just alluded to. There are Jain manuscripts, paintings of Hindu and Buddhist deities, but we have this really beautiful image of our Virgin of Guadalupe, dated 1745. A depiction of the Virgin Mary with dark skin remains one of the most mysterious religious icons. So our Virgin of Guadalupe was found in the Extremadura region of Spain, although there are known to be around 400 to 500 Black Madonnas, as they're referred to, recorded in Europe and more in Latin America and beyond. A first encounter with a Black Madonna is really intriguing. This particular painting in our collection is really striking due to its large size and rich painting hues of gold and red, which are so well preserved. But blackness might not be what we associate with the Virgin Mary. There are many depictions of Virgin Mary as fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and blonde or fair-haired. One explanation of Black Madonnas is associated with a biblical verse that might refer to the words of the bride in the Song of Solomon, "I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem." However, other historians argue that the Black Virgin Mary is linked to ancient spiritual worshipping of Mother Earth and other female divinities such as Isis or Ceres. In an upcoming exhibition at Wellcome, we are displaying our Virgin of Guadalupe to look at the kind of intrinsic interconnectedness between divinity and beauty ideals, the relationship between beauty and the imagined proximity to the divine. Our second theme is the understanding and investigation of the natural world.
The role of knowledge in shaping our world was one of the largest themes in Wellcome's collecting, but its iconography can be difficult to understand owing to the changing definitions of knowledge in different times and places. The metamorphoses of knowledge are shown in the number of paintings and books about alchemy in the Wellcome collection. In the 17th century, alchemists tried to discover correspondences between what we may regard as disparate entities in nature, such as metals, blood, and the soul. And their aim was to achieve the forms of perfection appropriate to each entity, whether it be gold, the panacea, or the philosopher's stone. And many authors satirized them, whether writers like Ben Jonson or painters such as Jan Steen. On the other hand, serious writers such as Andreas Libavius in the 16th and 17th century, and painters such as Thomas Wake, adopted a more ambivalent view. In this painting by Thomas Wake, the untidiness of the alchemist's laboratory and the disapproving look of the woman spinning thread in the left background suggests that the alchemist may be on a fool's errand, but his deep study of books and of alchemical techniques are not so clearly objects of ridicule. Usually, Weyck places his alchemists in pools of darkness, but here, light is flooding through the window on the left, bringing actual and perhaps philosophical enlightenment. Although Thomas Weyck was born and brought up in North Holland, this picture shows the skill as a colorist which he had learnt in Rome. A mainly monochrome setting is brought to life with splashes of scarlet, indigo, and ultramarine. His distinctive paintings were popular in England, where he worked for a time. Hence the two paintings of alchemists by Thomas Weyck, which have been at Ham House in Richmond upon Thames since 1677, in Weyck's own lifetime. And a second example of this theme is this painting of the Discovery of Quinine. It's one of 32 paintings that were commissioned by Henry S. Wellcome from the illustrator Ernest Board. They were commissioned as didactic pieces for display in Wellcome's first exhibition at a showroom in Wigmore Street in West End of London that existed from 1913 to 1932. Board was a skillful historical painter who had worked on mural paintings for the Houses of Parliament in London. This was a massive task involving many artists. In addition to Ernest Board, they included Frank Cadogan Cooper, Dennis Eden, Frank Salisbury, Henry Payne, and John Byam Shaw, all of them represented on Art UK. Their patrons were supporters of the Liberal Party, and their historical subjects tended to accord with a liberal or Whig view of history, celebrating forward-looking reformers from the past. The methods used in the Westminster murals were easily applicable to Board's paintings for Wellcome of past innovators introducing new ideas, inventions, or techniques. This painting of the isolation of the alkaloid quinine from the cinchona plant by the French chemists Pierre-Joseph Pelletier and Joseph Bien-Aimé Caventou focuses on an event that was vital to both Wellcome's business and his collection. Much of the research in Wellcome's laboratories was concerned with alkaloids, chemicals with physiological activity that could be isolated from plants, including nicotine and caffeine, colchicine used against gout, ergotamine used to stop hemorrhages in childbirth, and cocaine, now usually pronounced cocaine, then used in tonics and anesthesia. The cinchona plant played a big part in Wellcome's life, and anti-malarial drugs, in which quinine was the active ingredient, were a large part of his business. Indeed, after Henry S. Wellcome's death in 1936, malaria has continued to be central to the work of the Wellcome Trust right up to the present day, although quinine has long since ceased to be the mainstay of anti-malarial therapy. In fact, the Wellcome Company contributed to quinine's downfall by developing an alternative drug called Daraprim. Still, the cinchona plant and its derivative quinine have had enormous historical impact, whether in the transformation of agriculture in India, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, the massive exhibition on cinchona that Wellcome put on in 1930, or today in the manufacture of tonic water. And the painting by Ernest Board commemorates a critical moment in that story.
Our third theme is our locality in the borough of Camden, North London. So the Wellcome Collection's interests are global. Its visitors come from every continent, and its collections are written in over 200 languages. But we would not want to ignore its setting on Euston Road in London. So we'll discuss 3 pictures in this theme. So this first one, painted by the 4th Lord Methuen RA in 1953, shows the Wellcome building, which was constructed in 1932 on the northern fringe of Bloomsbury in London. The site was chosen for its proximity to the British Museum and its library, the University of London, and many medical and scientific institutions relevant to Wellcome's interests. The painting shows the Wellcome building on the right, and on the left, street bunting displayed for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in June 1953. Beyond the Wellcome building on the right are Friends House and the White Tower of New St Pancras Church, both still there. Euston Square was then a showcase of neoclassical architecture in which the Ionic order of the Wellcome building was very fitting. So this second painting is a watercolour painting by E.H. Dixon in 1837, and it depicts the great dust heap at the north end of Gray's Inn Road, next to Battle Bridge and Smallpox Hospital. So the dust heap here is painted as this kind of wash of grey colour that dominates the image. It shows what is now the King's Cross area on the brink of change. So you can see the agricultural plots laid out before the foot of the mound, signalling its kind of recent rural past, whilst the buildings and the soot demonstrate the urban spread that would take hold in Islington and Holloway with the development of the railways. Although dust to us has this kind of imaginary of the fine particles that you find in your house, this dust derives from the idea of dustmen, so rubbish. So most of the rubbish will have been ceramic ashes from kilns or industrial waste. But what's really interesting is the heap was disassembled in 1848 in order to make way for the building of King's Cross Station, which was part of the newly commissioned Great Northern Railway. But the contents were shipped to Moscow to create the embankment of the Moscow River. So in this painting, which I think is interesting. And in this painting, you can see in location, the Smallpox Hospital was built there on the right of the image, and King's Cross Station at some distance behind. The Great Dust Heap also features in Charles Dickens's novel, Our Mutual Friend, in 1865.
Also on this local theme, this big group portrait shows a garden party given by Angela Baroness Bodett Coots for the International Medical Congress held in London in 1881. She had inherited a banking fortune for which she used for many of her philanthropic projects Charles Dickens as one of her advisors. Her garden party for members of the International Medical Congress took place on the afternoon of Monday, 8th of August, 1881, in the gardens of her house, Holly Lodge, in Highgate, North London. After her death in 1906 and the death of her husband in 1922, the gardens of Holly Lodge that slope down one side of Highgate Hill were built over with large Tudor-style residential buildings called the Holly Lodge Estate, and they are still there today. In the painting, Angela Bodett Coots is the woman in a blue and white dress standing on the red carpet at the top of the steps in the background. And the man in the grey suit standing to the right of her is her husband, an American called William Bartlett Bodett Coots. He took his wife's name. Most of the other figures have been identified, and a key to them is available on the Wellcome Collection online catalogue. And there is another local reference, the man in the grey coat in the centre foreground. He is Thomas Spencer Wells, who has the Spencer Wells forceps named after him, and his home at Golders Hill in London is now a public park with a zoo called Golders Hill Park. The picture was painted from photographs that could be bought in the form of carte de visite from a shop in New Bond Street. The painting is signed in the lower left corner in red, A.P. Tilt, 1882. And in view of the size of the canvas, it's about 6 feet across, we think the signature refers to 3 painters who were brothers, all called A.P. Tilt, Alfred, Archibald, and Arthur. There was a fashion for this type of composite group portrait in late Victorian England, and the most successful proponent of it was Lois Cato Dickinson, 1819 to 1908, who has 3 examples on Art UK at Doncaster, Waddesdon, and in the National Portrait Gallery.
Our fourth and final theme is work by women artists, which I have seen has also been requested in the chat. So as most of the paintings in the Wellcome Collection are by unnamed artists, we can't actually say what proportion of the Wellcome paintings are by women, but the paintings by named women artists have much to offer, and we're going to talk about 2 of them today. So Sarah Biffin, 1784 to 1850, was one of several artists born without arms who made a living exhibiting their talents in marketplaces and fairs throughout Britain. She was supported by royalty and nobility and a medalist of the Royal Society of Arts. Her first lifetime retrospective exhibition was organised by the Philip Mould Gallery in London in 2022, so last year. In the research for that exhibition, this self-portrait was recently identified as the earliest of 7 self-portraits, which records her changing appearance over her long career. So painted in 1811, it was a gift to her early patron, William Stevenson, a Norwich publisher, and was bought by Wellcome when Stevenson's descendants consigned it to auction in 1919. At present, most libraries and museums in the UK are making kind of changes to increase their appeal to disabled and neurodiverse people who have often faced barriers to accessing historical collections or have been excluded from conversations in the sector. And one way of doing that is to present the work of disabled and neurodiverse people from the past whose achievements can engage all of us today. Sarah Biffin's portrait also shows how paintings can kind of be reimagined and revisited by future changing generations and of audiences.
Our final picture is a watercolour showing a kraamkamer, or birth chamber, in the Netherlands in the mid-17th century. The new mother is sitting up in bed on the right, surrounded by her god-siblings, the women providing her with moral support. The custom in the Netherlands was, and still is, to mark the birth by passing around sweets called beschuit met muisjes, which are biscuits or rusks with little mice made of sugar and aniseed, and sometimes colouring, although in the watercolour they are white. The picture was probably made by someone who was present at such an event, who was one of those god-siblings. And this fact, together with the watercolour technique, suggests a woman artist. It has been compared with watercolours by Gesine Terborch, born in 1631, who was the sister of the painter Gerard Terborch. Gesine used the same watercolour technique, as we see here, to paint family and domestic scenes. But the Wellcome painting is of no less interest as a historical document for being by an unnamed painter, although a name may well come to light in due course.
We hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to what has grown over 150 years into a very large and diverse collection, and it is still growing. Do visit the online catalogue at welcomecollection.org, and if you find anything there that you'd like to see, come to the Wellcome building at 183 Euston Road and see it in real life. At the same time, you could visit the magnificent reading room, which has really hit it off on TikTok, and also the exhibitions, the study room of the library, the bookshop, and our cafe. But great, thanks again to Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies for enabling this talk, and thank you for listening. And yeah, I hope you can find us at Wellcome Collection on Euston Road soon. We look forward to seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you.